Rebecca mentioned. It's called Hot Water, and my awesome friend Sarah Intamin, who's an artist, did this cover design. And this is a poem that I wrote for Jay. Cheers. And I started writing it for Jay before I knew Jay, when he was just a stranger that I saw on the street. And I started thinking about how, especially in New York and in cities and anywhere, but how you just see these people, you just see so many people in a day, so many faces, and people that you'd want to talk to, or that I maybe don't feel like talking, but you still have this kind of this story or this narration that runs in your head, and by the time they walk past you, you're already married, divorced, you know, kids off to college kind of thing. And I was thinking about all of these sort of stories and people that we see and missed conversations and falling in love with strangers. And then he messed it up because I saw him again and he wasn't a stranger anymore. So the whole theme, it turns, it changes, but hopefully for the better. So this is called Hot Water, and I'm just going to skip around a little bit. I loved a young man on the subway last week. I want to describe him. I want to say how he reminded me of you, of so many other loves. Like the way Todd says, he loves the women who jog towards him on bridges. As they get closer, you can imagine the whole thing going down. She would look so beautiful, soft in her private moments, so that as she jogs by, you can't help but tear up to be that close to her, having already lived and died in your racing thoughts, and so sigh at some memory and turn to look with relief. At least you didn't share any names. But then my stranger got off the subway, and I loathed him for it, and I missed him a little bit, his reading a book, shirt half tucked, just like a real relationship, Brooklyn bound. I loved a junkie with arrogant liberty spikes, even as they wilted and he wilted and I wilted, young and dumb and invincible, and we pawned everything, especially our love, and didn't even get a good price for it. And long since I loved him, they put him in prison for killing an old man at 5 a.m. when one of them thought it was still night and the other just morning. If I thought about him long enough, I might love him still. I loved a tattooist who bettered himself by leaving me, and once he was gone, I had all the ways I disappointed him tattooed on my body. I loved above the tree line where the air is thin and always cold, even in the summer, and love knows how to use a cook stove. I loved in a cave, moon bright alongside bats, with only my boots on, and so could have died just then. I sold the boots for bus fare. The cave is still there, in the foothills of the Flatirons. And I loved in a car while hair metal played, and I laughed with love in my mouth while love did all the driving. I have been seduced by such small things, a slight brush against the ear, a kiss. Once love played for me albums by a vulgar comedian as a means of seduction, and it totally worked. Once I loved on a rooftop in Fort Greene, and I'm pretty sure the neighbors saw. I feel like yesterday was 2 days. Oh, how I loved the Polish girl from across the street before I knew what it was to love. She was much taller than me and only loved me during the hottest months because of our cheap swimming pool, and we only kissed underwater. I remember sitting on the patio thinking my legs looked like a triangle and a diamond when we put our feet together. I have loved countless shades of mermaids with slept-on hairstyles and plenty of scarves, including a few when we were still quite fresh and slept less, and didn't know a thing about a thing but love. Why can't we love like that anymore? Because a heart is a trampled thing, like a chunk of sidewalk, and there are as many hearts as chunks of sidewalk, all being trampled by all of us in our different shoes, but here, of course, for just that purpose. Some trample many hearts, some one heart many times. I loved a German mathematician who had a wart on the tip of his nose, of which he was proud like a beauty mark, who played drums and studied set theory and climbed trees and slept in trees for an entire summer to keep from paying rent. He said I looked beautiful when I cried, and in vain I wrote a poem about it, as I do any time one whom I love says I look beautiful. But then there are the ones who don't have to say it. They just look at you that way. I am Juliet, longing for hyperbole so far out my window as to be on the fire escape, or to some others a sort of novelty. I loved a Far East gambler with a windowless apartment in Midtown. He thought of everything, and it made me nervous. At the YMCA across the bridge from San Francisco, the hills outside of San Francisco, hiding graffiti and poison oak, in their rocks and faint spray. I loved a fellow who made me a sandwich, the way the beets stained his hands. Then the strangest thing happened. I saw the young man on the subway again, and he followed me all the way to a bus stop where I turned and I kissed him, like in a cartoon when suddenly the Acme device explodes and my heart ached at how genuine his surprise. I have as many suitors as there are suits at a wedding or a funeral. I have loved and still do a polymorphous madman, a prince of Staten Island, clad in denim and fearless, a real poet who still believes in saints and railroads, with a heart so big I fear it may take him too soon. Like a child at the park accidentally overfills a water balloon, so much so I fear it some nights I swallow hard when the phone rings. I love another bard, an ex-army with bad knees from jumping out of airplanes. At turns he fucks and curses his ghosts and muses, both lovelier in his head. He will carry his idol to the river as if there was some romance to all this bullshit. No, he swears, there's romance in all of it. We sail through this fog on radiant ships. I love a Greek woman up there in Maine, not to be forgotten among the car parts, drawing connections between the cornfields, abandoned steel, and the stench of paper. She is most confident in some cold, those foreign places like old Chicago and the rhetoric of nature films. I love a tall, skinny guy with glasses out there in the middle of it all, trying to make something of himself, of his verses, in the hours other than 9 to 5. Once we laughed for 15 minutes or days, dervishes on the lawn at Eastridge, unable to attend some event, hosted by an accomplishment which sought to hold us hostage that evening, in the meantime repeating all for everyone and nothing for ourselves. I love a 7-foot-tall jazz man deep in the mountains with saxophones for fingers and a tobacco-stained child's face atop an old man's hips, bitter-tasting creature, but kinder than he care admit, and too intelligent for his own good, with a bend towards heartbreak and hash. And the most beautiful songs, rolling incantations over damp reeds, evoke the Lenox Lounge. I love a Dharma brat who sings in the bath. Not even words, just joyous noises. Best roommate I ever had back at the loft, where we painted the walls red and everyone complimented our style, not knowing it came from stacking chairs unevenly to reach the ceiling. I am here now because he carried me then. I took the stranger on the subway to my bedroom. Once I kissed him, I could not bear to sleep unless beside him, holding him tightly within each one of my curves. I am so proud of my love. And I have lost a great many chances at love, too. Nathan, so great a loss, I mention him by name, the only openly secret admirer I have ever had, an expatriate, practically Korean these days. And Rob, I couldn't help the ones who died. Forever 18 in a photo I lost, though I still carry the negative and the obituary. I could have loved a man with metal hands who collected keys and drank whiskey and spoke softly, but I couldn't see my way past his best friend. I loved very greatly an arrogant Oklahoman, and I thought I could love the voices right out of his head, and I could love him harder than his father's hands, smooth away his mother's religion. He swore he'd kill himself if I ever left, but then he left me. Good thing I never made such a promise. A barnacle shaken free isn't long for the sea, clinging to the next nearest boat. After that, I rearranged all the furniture. I have loved so many pretty boys, like rescuing all those stray cats that summer in Crown Heights, schizophrenic kittens with philosophical minds and an inability to find themselves, let alone pay bills on time. And yet so frightening here at the beginning of things, in a way for which there are no words, standing on the surface of an overgrown pond at noon with no reflections or hints at what's below. The only two inhabiting a large house, the stranger and I, afraid to light the fire escape or look under the bed, so sure so much love must come at a price, touching often so as not to fall from this dimension. I love a tender handful I forgot to mention or couldn't bear to speak of quite dearly. On an endless day, I showered with love, even as I stood beside shivering, letting love have all the hot water. Thank you.